Okay, two more to go. Superman 4, The Quest for Peace, has the worst visual effects of the Christopher Reeve movies. At this point, the rights to make the movie had been sold by the Salkins to a couple of directors who had just made kind of B movies in the past, director producer combo that had just made B movies in the past, but were really wanting to try and enter into legitimate filmmaking, and saw buying the rights to Superman as a means to do that. The Salkins, I think they saw diminishing returns for continued Superman films, and so were ready to sell at that point. Anyway, these filmmakers were clearly not ready to really enter into legit filmmaking, certainly not at the level that Superman movies had been made in the past. It's some of the most awful and unrealistic looking blue screen effects. I still mostly saw no wires with the sharpness. The clarity really dialed down quite a bit. Also helped with the film grain anyway, so I mean, that's still the way I would recommend watching it. But man, there were some dumb new powers in the script here. I haven't yet sat down and watched the commentary, but there's a great commentary with the writer of this film who just talks about how it all went so horribly wrong because he was there from beginning to end seeing like all the problems with this movie. And so it's a great perspective, and I think a great honest perspective from the writer on this one. So that's on my to-do list still to watch that again. But yeah, dumb new powers that were the results of a lot of budget constraints. That like his make the ship dark vision. I don't know, when he's trying to cover up and bury the ship that he arrived in that's buried in the barn on the Kent farm, someone's coming, so he has to kind of bury it. And so he looks at it and you can see an effect going on, and then it just kind of visually gets darker and darker. And I'm like, what just happened? Did he just bury the ship? Did he just make it disappear? Did he just make it dark? I don't know what I'm supposed to understand just happened here. But Superman did something with the power, and then the ship went away, and you can't see it now. Or oh my gosh, his infamous rebuild the Great Wall of China vision, which he used to rebuild a section of the Great Wall of China, is like a blue laser to differentiate from heat vision, so he can rebuild things with blue lasers out of his eyes. My gosh. We did see some of this stuff going on in Lester's version of Superman 2. And maybe, was there any of that in Superman 3? I don't think so. But anyway, it just really started getting crazy. And then Nuclear Man, his costume design, he was originally meant to be a clone, like a convincing clone. Christopher Reeve was going to play both parts. But that wasn't going to work with what the filmmakers were up for. And so they made this costume that looks like, and the performance from the actor as well, just felt ridiculous and like a pro wrestling character, you know. Now, Christopher Reeve's performance, though, is still strong, and I admire so much that he did not phone in any of his scenes as Superman or as Clark Kent. Those scenes were still wonderful to watch because they were every bit, and reviewers at the time, I think Gene Shalit at the time, or maybe it was Roger Ebert at the time, said that like he still was giving a superb performance as Clark Kent in Superman, and I think that's still pretty much undeniably true. He didn't have as good of material to work with, but he elevated the material in every scene that he was in as Superman and as Clark Kent. I've long thought to myself, man, I would love to just make a short film out of this movie where I cut out so much of the dumb crap with Nuclear Man and stuff and really just focus on this well-intentioned desire on Superman's part to bring peace to the world by ridding it of nuclear weapons, which is what he, goes about doing. So I loved seeing Superman and Clark Kent struggling internally with this problem of the arms race and how the world seems to be on the brink in some ways of killing each other. And what am I going to do about this? What is my role in this world? Without actually verbalizing those things, I could see those questions going on in his mind. Like, should I be stepping in this way? What should I do here? And I just loved that I could see that in his performance. Something that was interesting to me that I think maybe, I don't know if we'd see this in a film today, but I've long expressed my frustration with Hollywood's mentality of follow your heart, do what feels right. And at one point when Clark is seeking advice from Lois, she says to him, Clark, you gotta go with your gut. And it's based on that interaction with her that he makes the decision to try and rid the world of nuclear weapons. And it ends up being the wrong choice. And that's what I find so fascinating. That the normal Hollywood message is follow your heart, and the hero does it, and that's the right thing to do. But in here, following his heart, or going with his gut, as Lois says, is ultimately the wrong choice. Because at the end of the movie, he realizes humanity needs to want this. I can't be the one to bring this about myself. It's not going to work. It's not going to be a lasting solution if I just try to rid the world of nuclear weapons. Humanity, it's a humanity problem, which is something that is said in not so many words. So anyway, yeah, I thought that was a really interesting element in the script thematically. I love how Lois and Clark and Lois and Superman in this movie read to me like comfy old friends. Especially like her relationship with Clark. She seems so much more accepting of Clark and appreciative of Clark that it just feels like, like a comfy relationship that they've had for a long time. And so I love that kind of evolution, that advancement of their relationship in this story. Let's see here. Oh, and the Lois, when she regains her memory of Superman, he re-reveals his identity to her in order to wrestle through these issues of what should I do about the arms race and the request from this kid, what should I do? It feels like a little bit more of a mature or contented status that Lois has. She remembers him, but she's no longer torn up as she was before he took her memory away at the end of Superman 2. It feels like she still loves him, but it's a more mature love, and it's also a love that comes with contentment, realizing that there's no agonizing here, like, oh, I remember now, and oh my gosh, and I'm crushed again that we can't be together. She seems to just really love him, but to know that that's a love that's ultimately not meant to truly be. And I love the contentment that I sense in that. And I don't know how much of that is intended, how much of that was in Kidder's thought process, how much of that was intended in the script. I don't know, but that's how it read to me. And I really appreciated, again, that sort of more mature take on her relationship with Superman. It's interesting, again, to see Superman at the end of that kind of exchange when he realizes he needs to take away her memory again. He says out loud, seemingly quoting what maybe the elders of Krypton had said, he says, never put one of them above the rest, love all humanity instead. And then he kind of gives commentary saying, that's not fair. And then he kisses Lois and makes her forget. And so I saw again what I felt like I was seeing in Superman 2, that like he does love her and he would love nothing more, maybe, than to be with her. Well, clearly that's not actually true. What he would actually love more is to serve humanity. And he sees that as a greater, something of greater importance, a higher virtue. And yet, he is a completely content person. He is a completely fulfilled person. We would say that of Superman, and I think we would rightly say that of Jesus, who never entered into a romantic relationship, but he lived the most fulfilled, intentional, purposeful human life. He lived out the purpose of humanity more fully than any other human being in history, and yet it did not involve him entering into marriage or romantic relationship. And I think that's something that's so important for us to remember as Christians, even as we maybe are happy that we've discovered, happiness in marriage or something like that. We shouldn't be assuming that that's what the Lord has for all other believers, and that if they're single, we need to kind of fix that situation and try to get them, coupled up with somebody else so they can have their happily ever after. Their happily ever after might be a very different flavor and a different picture, and it might be something that is noble in a way that we will never experience in our lives because of the path that God took us on. And so I think we just need to have an openness to that, and I think that can contribute to course correcting some of the ways that I think we have fed as Christians this unhealthy idea in culture today that our sexuality defines us, our romantic relationships, our romantic status, these things define who we are, when they don't. And so I was just reminded, seeing Superman 4 and the way that this relationship is handled, where it ends up, as just kind of a nice example in fiction anyway of a completely fulfilled life that is not fulfilled because of a particular romantic or sexual status. I appreciated things about Margot Kidder's performance in this movie, as I did with 2, but I think even more so in this one, that I hadn't before. She really brings layers that I don't think are in the script, unless there is subtext that she talked to the writer about that's not in the actual dialogue. But the final chat between her and Clark leads me to suspect that the way Margot Kidder was approaching this role was that she at times suspects that Clark might be Superman, but she is no longer interested in pursuing that and figuring that out for sure. She waffles back and forth in some moments between treating Clark like he's Clark, he's not anybody else. But then when she's talking to Clark and Superman has gone missing, and she's like, if I could talk to Superman, there's some things I would want to say to him. And then she just goes on about what she would say to Superman. And I felt like in that scene, she was thinking to herself, Clark, if he's Superman, I'm going to say all this right now, just in case maybe he's Superman. That's what I felt was going on in the emotion of that moment. And it's so interesting. How much of that I was bringing to the experience, I don't know. How much of that was actually in Kidder's performance, I couldn't tell you. But it really read that way to me this time around and made me appreciate Margot Kidder as a performer like I never had. And so I was very glad to have that experience in Superman 4, of all things. I appreciated, let's see here. I guess that's all I have to say about Margot Kidder there. The arms race issue, the main philosophical issue of this movie, I think it was a good one, but I would have liked humanity's flaws more deeply recognized and wrestled with. You can infer by the end of this movie that Superman is like, I can't fix this. But he didn't really. He said basically, there will be peace. There will be peace when the people of the world want it so badly that their governments will have no choice but to give it to them. And I think that's an overly simplistic, actually a very humanist philosophically, and also naive statement that places the hope of humanity on ourselves and in ourselves, when all evidence in history suggests we are not getting any better. And in fact, evidence suggests arguably we are getting worse. And so it's a very humanist idea that humans are at some point going to be able to just get over our differences, band together, unite, and make this wonderful utopia. But like what the evidence is for that, I couldn't tell you. So anyway, so I wish it would have been leaned into a little bit more, and Superman not saying this will happen, but instead to say, listen, the problem is in our hearts, and we've got to, and that's the problem that we need to face, and leave the question of how that problem is going to be fixed an open one. Because I think, of course I would say that given my worldview, because I think that the answer is ultimately Jesus transforming our hearts and in bringing about his rule in the future, So it would have been more satisfying to me if he would have acknowledged and then put the responsibility on humans in a more sobering way than to kind of assume that, like, yes, this is going to happen and this is when it'll happen. All humanity is going to want it so bad, then their governments will give it to them. Okay. I don't know exactly how you're envisioning that in more detail, Superman. So I found that kind of unsatisfying in that regard. But at least at the end of the day, it does put some responsibility on the shoulders of humanity, and in an indirect way acknowledges that this is a human problem. This is a problem with our nature as humans and something in us that is wrong. And not a lot of movies today are, even going to be willing to go that far. So, I found, despite all the crap going on with the visual effects and other things, that there were still some scenes in Superman 4 that took me by surprise and that I really appreciated.